order. Welcome to meeting number 5 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development.
Today's meeting will take place in hybrid, pursuant to the standing orders. The members participating in person in the room and online are able to use Zoom.
Person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. You'll also notice a QR code on the card which will link to a short awareness video. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your microphone, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. I'd like to go next to committee's budget. The clerk distributed to members this morning 3 draft budgets for the studies currently being undertaken by this committee. Canada's Arctic Strategy, $27,300. Russian incursion into Polish and Romanian airspace, $500. Situation in Haiti and Canada's response, $4,000. Does it please the committee to adopt these budgets? Yeah. Thank you. Canada's Arctic Strategy, pursuant to Standing Order 106, subsection 2, and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, September 23, 2025, the committee is meeting on the study of Canada's Arctic Strategy. I would now like to welcome our witnesses for today's meeting. From the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, Robert Sinclair, Director General, Arctic, Eurasian and European Affairs, welcome. Eric Laporte, Executive Director, Regional Security and Defense Relations Division, and from the Canadian Armed Forces, Brigadier General Daniel Rivière, Commander of Joint Force North. Up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions from members. I now invite Mr. Sinclair to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the invitation to appear with my colleagues Eric Laporte and General Rivière. We're very pleased to brief you today on this very, very pertinent and topical issue. In December 2024, after months of meaningful and distinctions-based engagement with Indigenous partners and territorial and provincial governments, Canada launched the Arctic Foreign Policy in response to the evolving geopolitical context in the Arctic. Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine in 2022 shook the foundations of international cooperation in the Arctic and around the world. Canada has been clear that there will be no business as usual with Russia at the Arctic Council or elsewhere. From a security perspective, the harsh Arctic environment and sea ice no longer offer the same level of natural protection they once did. As international maritime activity increases, more countries are turning their eyes to the Arctic as a region of opportunity to pursue their economic and geopolitical interests. And there's a narrative among some non-Arctic states that because, as they say, what happens in the Arctic affects them, they should have a greater role in Arctic governance. Canada's position is that the Arctic should be governed by the Arctic states, first and foremost in collaboration with Arctic and Northern Indigenous peoples. Canada's Arctic foreign policy, which builds on and complements the Arctic and Northern Policy Framework, responds to these and other challenges. The policy consists of 4 pillars. The first, asserting our sovereignty, recognizes that diplomacy and defense policy go hand in hand. It identifies areas where diplomacy can support Canada's Arctic security agenda, such as by holding an Arctic security dialogue with Arctic allies at the foreign minister level. It also recognizes the need for better information sharing with domestic partners on international security trends in the Arctic and supporting research security in the Arctic. It also calls for Canada to manage Arctic boundary disputes through a rules-based approach, including for Tartupaluk or Hans Island and the extended continental shelf. The second pillar, advancing Canada's interests through pragmatic diplomacy, prioritizes cooperation with like-minded Arctic states, particularly in setting the rules that govern the region, and calls for Canada to enhance cooperation with our most important partners in the Arctic, the United States and the Nordic states. Recognizing the importance of the North American Arctic, the policy states that Canada will open new consulates in Nuuk, Greenland, and Anchorage, Alaska, to promote economic ties, security partnerships, environmental cooperation, and people-to-people connections. Cooperation with non-Arctic states and actors, I want to note, is beneficial to address global challenges impacting the Arctic, such as climate change. The EU, the UK, Japan, and South Korea are priority partners in this regard, highlighted in the policy.
Under the third pillar, exercising leadership in Arctic governance and multilateral issues, Canada reaffirms the need for Arctic states to continue to preside over a well-governed, rules-based region. Canada will increase its financial contributions to the Arctic Council to support Canadian leadership and engagement. The fourth pillar of the policy concerns the adoption of a more inclusive approach to Arctic diplomacy. Canada will strengthen its engagement with like-minded states, territorial and provincial governments, Indigenous peoples, and other domestic partners to adopt a more inclusive and coherent approach to Arctic diplomacy. These partners must be active participants in international relations beyond the Arctic Council. Canada will also facilitate access to international markets for goods, products from Indigenous and Northern communities, in addition to attracting foreign direct investment in these communities to contribute to economic and infrastructure development. Canada has created the position of Ambassador for Arctic Affairs, Ms. Virginia Mearns, who was nominated and appointed, rather, to this role by the Prime Minister last July and officially began on 15th of September. The ambassador plays an important role in ensuring that the foreign policy for the Arctic continues to be connected to people living in the North. Ambassador Mearns is very disappointed that she is unable to attend this meeting today for technical reasons. She has asked me to let you know that she hopes to join you as soon as possible. In conclusion, Mr. Chair, Canada's foreign policy for the Arctic will strengthen Canada's position in the Arctic. I would like to thank the members of the committee for their attention and their commitment to this very important issue. We are happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
For your remarks, I will now open the floor to questions from members, beginning with MP Newman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here today. So, high-level comment first is we're obviously looking at strengthening the diplomatic and security partnership in the Arctic, and we're wanting to address the geopolitical competition. But more specifically, with regards to F-35s, Chinese and Russian interest into Canada's north have been hammering home the importance of Finland, an Arctic peer, that have placed an order for 64 F-35s and is slated to have their pilots trained, bases upgraded, and airframes ready to fly by 2030. With a much larger population here in Canada, we're falling behind on all of the fronts. Our bases aren't ready, and we don't have enough pilots, and the government's now taking another look at the program. So 2 quick questions on this from a foreign affairs lens. Is there any external reason that Canada is falling so far behind our peer nations in establishing our next generation fighter capabilities? And second part, what are the implications internationally with our NATO Arctic allies if we continue to delay acquiring the replacements and widen our commitment capability gap?
Thank you. I'm well assisted by both Eric and the General, who are better placed than me to respond to that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. If I could highlight on F-35, the government has an ongoing review of that. That said, there are 16 aircraft, I think, that are on contract, 4 of them to be received as of next year. So that is proceeding on course. In terms of our engagement with NATO allies, I would point out that over the course of the past couple of weeks, we've had a number of CF-18s deployed to Europe that are sort of in operation and in training with European allies. So at the moment, I don't see that as a limiting factor. Stop there. I don't know if the General has any other elements to add. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, at this point, I have j'ai pas d'informations à rajouter.
I don't have any information to add, Chair.
If I may, what do you need from us for you to best do your jobs? Could you talk about the operational gaps that we currently have in the North?
So, Mr. Chair, operational gaps, if I may, is this specific to your last question?
Please, yeah.
F-35s?
Ideally, yeah.
So my mandate as Commander Joint Task Force North excludes NORAD mandate and search and rescue and special forces type operations. So NORAD and F-35s and fighter force is not within my
Could you or could any of the
reference.
three of you speak to the Russian and Chinese Arctic operational capacities?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe I can start and happy to have colleagues join in. Obviously, Russia is following its illegal invasion of Ukraine, remains the most capable actor in the Arctic. Despite its engagement in Ukraine, it is continuing to invest heavily in defensive and military capabilities in the Arctic, essentially going back to kind of a Cold War tactics and mentality there. A lot of it is intentionally for defensive purposes along the Northern Sea route, but there's nothing preventing it for using for offensive purposes, and we've seen sort of Russian aircraft come close to NORAD air defense identification zones. But we're also seeing, as you point out, Mr. Chair, an increase in collaboration on the part of Russia and China, particularly in the Arctic. Chinese military engagement has been joint maritime patrols off the Aleutians, whether warships or Coast Guard from Russian and Chinese, but also Russian and Chinese aircraft, again, off the American Air Defense Identification Zone in July 2024. China is very much engaged in resource extraction in the Russian north, and I think is leveraging Russia's need for resource and sanctions evasion as a result of the Ukraine war. And China is really sort of profiting from LNG exploitation, et cetera. But I'm happy to turn it to other colleagues for any other elements. Thanks.
So, Mr. Chair, we've observed joint air and maritime patrols between Russia and the PRC. However, never did they infringe on the interdiction zones or sovereign boundaries of any sort. So that's what I could add to this.
Mm-hmm. Do we know if Moscow, Beijing, or any other non-NATO states have changed their posturing as it relates to the Arctic?
Certainly, China has included the Arctic as part of its Polar Silk Road plans and has expressed a desire to be a polar great power, and it has recently backed off from its narrative about being a near Arctic state. I think it was realizing that that was not an effective advocacy position. But it still, it wants to be a global power, and to be a global power, Arctic is part of its planning. I turn to my colleagues if they want to add anything else, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will go next to MP Rob Oliphant. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. I have sort of 4 areas in 6 minutes, so I'm going to try to get them quickly. The first one is the concept of co-development, which has been a principle of the government's Arctic strategy, and then the reformulation of the foreign policy. Can you just explain what co-development means to global affairs?
Sure. Co-development means engaging with those who are most impacted by efforts to develop policy in the North. The ANPF was their starting point. That was the first time Arctic policy was not made in the South. It was made with Northern and Arctic partners. And in developing the Arctic foreign policy, we were at pains to hold ourselves to that standard as well. So we have extensive consultations that underpinned the development of the policy with Northern and Arctic partners, territorial governments, Indigenous peoples. You see me leafing through my papers here. I'm looking for the 4-page list of consultations that I have somewhere in my papers that you, sir, were also part of.
I trust you
well.
on them, and I know they're in your head, actually.
But the point is nothing about us without us, and that's what the Arctic foreign policy how we developed it.
Could it be a strategy that every department in this government actually learns from?
Well, I'm hesitant to speak for other government departments, but I'll say that in our case, we've developed, I think, for global affairs, an immense amount of goodwill with Arctic and Northern partners by how we went about this, and I'm very proud of my team and the effort that they put into this, and it's an important step on our journey towards reconciliation.
Huge principle. Second question is with respect to the Arctic Council and the chair going from Russia ending to Norway to Denmark. What do you see as Canada's role in this upcoming period in the Arctic Council?
So our role is really to support the chairship, ensure that the Arctic Council is seen to be as active and vibrant as possible as part of the Arctic foreign policy. We make it clear that there can be no business as usual with Russia, and certainly with what's happening with airspace violations, et cetera. There is no prospect of meetings at the senior Arctic official or political level at the Arctic Council, but the working groups, which are the pistons of the Arctic Council, and technical in nature, scientific, those are meeting virtually at 8, as we call it, with all countries participating as they might, and that's important to keep the science moving.
And do you see Canada aligned with Denmark in terms of this
absolutely. Their priorities are on oceans, climate, engaging Indigenous voices. The Kingdom of Denmark, with Greenland in the chair, we're very, very, very closely aligned with their priorities.
Third question is with respect to NATO and area of responsibility. And if there's a perception of any change in the accession of Finland and Sweden into NATO, and an engagement of convincing NATO partners that our spending in the North, our work in the North, and our engagement in Arctic security is really part of NATO. Is there a conversation about that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Certainly, you're correct in saying that with Finland and Sweden becoming members of the alliance, we see a bit of a shifting north in terms of areas of interest on the part of European security. And we could say that, Sweden and Finland joining the alliance have brought forward lots of real capabilities, so a very welcome addition to the alliance. We've seen since 2022 a real shift in European security with Russia's invasion in Ukraine, and we're seeing obviously the past few weeks with drones and the like. So the security situation in Europe has changed dramatically, but so too has the security situation in North America, as we've talked about, Russian and Chinese joint operations coming close to North America, hypersonic missiles, etc. So we are in fact engaged in a conversation with European allies, with NATO allies about getting more recognition for Canadian contributions to security in North America. SACEUR's area of responsibility covers European territory. It does not cover NATO. That said, NATO's Article 5 commitment does cover North America, does cover our territory. But historically, Canada and the U.S. have said, North America is ours. We're taking care of it through NORAD, binationally and nationally. But there's some investments that we're going to be doing that we want to be sort of given more credit for in the NATO context.
Perfect. I'm done. Shocking.
6 minutes.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll go to MP Patrick Bonan. Vous avez 6 minutes.
You have 6 minutes, sir. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. Thank you for being here. I would like to come back to the question of climate change that you have mentioned. Is there currently a specific strategy in defense to deal with climate change? Chair? I would have to come back with an answer. I'd have to consult. It's beyond the purview of my mandate. All right. Perhaps I could ask someone to answer partially, but I can say that we have a center of excellence in Montreal that deals with climate change. It's a NATO center that is led by Canada, and which looks at the very issue of climate change and the consequences of that climate change on the armed forces. So we are working we have to be able to work in all environments, the hottest environment as well as the coldest. And it is an aspect that is of import to NATO and for Canada. So it is at the center of excellence in Montreal. But to your knowledge, there is, for example, in the United States, they have a specific strategy on the Arctic and climate change. You're saying that for the moment, or at least for the time being here in Canada, we don't have a similar strategy? I don't have the details, but I know that the DND has a policy on climate change, but operationally speaking, dealing with equipment and so on, but I don't have details about it. Once again, to climate change, there is, we understand, a potential by 2030 of freeing up of the glaciers melting, and therefore there would be submarines that would be able to navigate there. Can you tell me, if I've understood correctly, when will this whole process of purchasing, of acquisition of the submarines be finished? Will they be able to do so? And why do we need 12 submarines? I think it's 12. I believe that there is one that is operational at the present time. Chair, thank you. I'll have to have a recourse to my colleagues in the Navy, the Royal Canadian Navy, to be able to answer this question, because once again, it's outside of the mandate that I hold as Commander North. My team is involved in the process, so I can give a partial response. We want to try to be able to obtain 12 conventional submarines to patrol our 3 coasts, including the Arctic. And there are companies that are in competition, a German one and a South Korean company, that are competing to that end. Yes, we will have submarines in May to be able to establish a domain awareness, as it is called, what their capacities are as submarines, but also to be able to defend the various areas, including the Arctic, if necessary. In terms of timeline, I'm not able to tell you precisely what is going to be that timeline, but the first submarine won't be functional before 2035, I could say. Quebec presently, I think, is the only province that considers a part of its territory as being in the Arctic. To you, what is the value-added aspect of Quebec being involved in these international jurisdictions, given the natural geography of our province, Quebec?
We, Mr. Chair, engage with avec toutes les provinces et territoires.
With all of the provinces and territories that have a presence in the Arctic. It includes Manitoba, Newfoundland, and Labrador as well. They do have territory there. The engagement with the territories has led us to be better able to establish informed policies with respect to the Arctic. But it's very important, if not and necessary, to ally that with domestic policy. We have to be able to align our foreign policy with our domestic policy as well.
Merci, messieurs.
Thank you, sir.
The next round of questions, beginning with MP Rood. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for being here. You mentioned a little bit earlier, you mentioned drones, and I'm going to focus a little bit more on drones right now. I'm curious what classes of drones, fixed-wing, rotary, vertical takeoff and landing, are currently certified and routinely deployed north of 60 degrees for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, search and rescue, maritime domain awareness, and logistics.
Mr. Chair, what I've seen as part of my mandate and through Operation Nanook, which is our main operational activity in the north, is actual testing of some remotely or uncrewed drones. But when it comes to major platform procurement projects, that's not something that I can actually answer today. Yeah.
So of the drones that are currently being used, do you have any idea of what their endurance or range and payload specifications? Any of that? I mean, especially since it's minus 40 Celsius out, I guess that's where I'm getting to, is the climate.
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, these types of emerging capabilities, we don't force employ as part of my mandate. I know that there's testing done as part of procurement, but when it comes to specific payloads and such, I'm not able to answer today, but that's something I could look into and come back with.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. For maritime Arctic operations, what is the status of Canadian uncrewed surface vehicles and uncrewed underwater vehicles for ice edge mapping, seabed sensing, and choke point monitoring? And what is the target for taskable days per season by 2026-2027?
Mr. Chair, this is a very good question. When it comes to procurement and development processes, I'm an employer of these assets, so it's difficult for me to provide the details this morning. Yeah, this morning, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I'll change the focus a little bit then. What are the rules of engagement for neutralizing hostile or unknown drones over Canadian territory and territorial waters, especially around critical infrastructure and North American Aerospace Defense Command sites? And how are attribution and evidence handled for prosecutions and diplomatic action?
Mr. Chair, this is an excellent question. As part of my mandate, I have no rules of engagement assigned. They would be assigned upon need, and NORAD is not part of Joint Task Force North mandate, although I'm pretty sure they do have rules of engagement. This is not, I'm not knowledgeable of these.
Okay.
As not part of my mandate. I'm sorry for that.
That's okay. So, changing gears, officials note Russia's intensified Arctic build-out and growing resilience on China. So what is DFATD's current assessment of Russia-China strategic alignment in the Arctic? And where do we see the greatest sanctions, evasion risks, such as you mentioned earlier, LNG, could be financial channels, and what are the three highest risks, and what concrete countermeasures are in place?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we are increasingly concerned by the increasing cooperation between China and Russia, particularly in the Arctic, and the fact that Chinese investments are effectively skirting sanctions. What they're doing is they're displacing what would have been Western companies originally working with to the extraction of LNG, for example, and now it's Chinese firms that are there. We're seeing increasing cooperation on the military front, as I've mentioned, and there are a number of sanctions, obviously, to Russian entities, and that continues. Obviously, the greatest concern is for technology transfers that can be of dual use and immediately put into military capabilities. But maybe I'll stop there. I don't know unless others have anything to add.
Perhaps I would just add that we work very closely with partners in the G7 and beyond to coordinate on sanctions. And Canada, we've sanctioned over 3,300 Russian entities and individuals, and we will continue to identify areas where sanctions can help restrict Russia's war efforts. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We will next go to MP Bill Blair. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Welcome to our witnesses this morning. A number of questions. If I may, I'd just like to begin with a bit of clarification. There was some suggestion earlier in a question that the F-35 review has resulted in certain delays on the delivery of the F-35s, and my understanding right now is that there has been no delays, that the delivery of the first 16 is well on track with Lockheed Martin, and that there is simply the review is focusing on making sure it's the best possible deal for Canada, our economy, our workers, and our country. And so just wanted to make sure that was clear. And the witness is nodding, Mr. Laporte. Thank you. So I'm glad to hear that. My first question, if I may, I go back to General Rivera. General Rivera, you're responsible for the entire North, through JTF North, based in Yellowknife, and you have responsibility as well for the Canadian Rangers. I'm particularly interested in some of the investments that we are making and need to make in the Canadian Rangers. And my questions really pertain to your experience with the Ranger program, particularly in the delivery of Operation Nanook. And I'm aware, for example, that there's a fairly significant investment being made in Yellowknife. A 9,000 square meter joint purpose facility for JTF North and the Rangers is being constructed there even as we speak, and that will provide classrooms, training offices, drill halls, a place for vehicle maintenance right in Yellowknife, a fairly significant investment. But my question is, what effort are you able to make in incorporating Indigenous knowledge into Operation Nanook? And perhaps any advice you might provide to the Government of Canada on how we can continue to grow and expand and make optimal use of the Canadian Ranger program.
Mr. Chair, thank you so much for this great question. I'll start with the multi-purpose building that's being built in Yellowknife. Great facility. Not only will host the first Canadian Ranger Patrol Group, but other elements of what we call Team North, so unit based in Yellowknife. Great facility, under construction. We should be finished construction by 2026. So as per plan, and actual use sometimes in 2027. It will allow our rangers to access, as you mentioned, training, classrooms, office space, and et cetera. So that's a great investment. I would say there's also to the Canadian Rangers increased capability. There's good investments made in expanding Operation Nanook. There's an actual line of effort for Up Nanook that's dedicated to Canadian Rangers and interoperability with our Air Force to actually project them and increase our capability to see, the eyes and ears. They are really that. So there's a lot of investment on the operational area as well through Nanook. Incorporation of indigenous knowledge. I'll pick on Nanook again every time. There is nothing we do for which we don't consult, have consent. Every piece of land that we would maneuver on is owned by rights holders. So we totally respect that. For us, it's important. There's a stewardship role for us as well. But every time we plan for an Nanook, we engage with the communities, and we always incorporate their knowledge in the way that we train so that we can survive. As you can imagine, it's pretty cold and harsh up there, and their knowledge is actually an operational enhancer to what we do. So yes, as a first round, sir, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, General. And I'm also aware that a little over a year and a half ago, you and General Wright, who at the time was in charge of CFINCOM, provided a fairly comprehensive briefing to Northern Territorial premiers and Indigenous leadership on the threat environment and the changes to the threat environment as a result of climate change, technological advancements, and the activities of our adversaries. I've heard very positive feedback from that, both the territorial leadership and Indigenous leadership, about the briefing that you provided and the fact that they really felt that they were being engaged with in a very responsible way and helping to get better understanding. And perhaps you could talk a little bit about how you engage with those Indigenous and territorial governments in your important work as the commander of JTF North.
Very brief response, please, because we're running out of time.
So we've initiated these regular, frequent briefings or threat briefings and operational updates to the territorial premiers a year and a half ago. We continued these. Typically, there's intelligence command presence that brief on the emerging and threat situation, CSIS, CSC. I had the opportunity to provide an update on Nanook and other operational activities. So these have continued, and actually the frequency has increased. So it's important to us to be transparent and to share as much as we can in a secure setting.
Thank you.
Of course. So this has become practice.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll go next to MP Bonin. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. General Rivière, Mr. Rivière, I would like to mention that you don't know that there is a specific strategy for the North. Is there one, really, or not? Well, I'm sorry, Chair. You mentioned a strategy a climate strategy for the North. But I know that in the United States there is an Arctic strategy. It was established earlier, I think in 2024, to deal with the rapid change, climate change. Is there going to be a similar strategy in Canada? And if not, should we not, if we don't have one, draw our inspiration from what exists in the United States? Chair, thank you. I know there's a strategic campaign plan at DND for defense, which has which addresses a very broad array of operational issues. But I really can't point to something concrete in it. What I can say is that there are efforts to adapt to climate change, but when it becomes strategy specific, it's a little hard for me. Yes, but is there a specific one on the Arctic, can you say? There are planning efforts that are underway to improve Nanook, our operation. I know that is underway, but there's no strategy on the Arctic, a specific strategy on the Arctic. Chair, we're trying to develop a campaign plan for the Arctic as we speak. And your campaign plan, is that a strategy? Well, strategy. A campaign plan deals at the operational level, whereas a strategy is something that is specific to the Arctic moment. But yes, but in the 4 areas that were mentioned dealing with the Arctic, can you come back to that, and can you see how it allies with foreign policy?
Climate change is part of the Arctic foreign policy. Well, climate change is identified in the Arctic foreign policy as a key threat for the Arctic, and certainly our support, increased support for the Arctic Council reflects that, and our efforts to incorporate Indigenous knowledge about how climate change is impacting local ecosystems, environment, human health.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, we'll go to MP Ziad Abul Taif. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the witnesses. Some countries call in the Northwest Passage, the Arctic waters, as international waterway. That brings to mind Canadian sovereignty in this field, and there could be a risk of confrontation with some of these vessels coming to our sovereign property and borders. What if this become an issue? What can we do? Are we ready to deal with that to preserve our sovereignty in the north?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a very good question. From a Canadian perspective, we have put baselines around the entire Arctic archipelago, including Northwest Passage, which we all consider to be internal waterways of Canada by virtue of historical title. That claim is long-standing and well-established on the part of Canada. We do have foreign vessels that traverse through the area. They do so, provided that they comply with Canadian rules pertaining to safety, security, protection, and the environment, etc. And so by them applying for process to go through, that is frankly recognizing our sovereignty over those waterways. I would also argue that the fact every day, the fact that there are a range of activities happening in Canada's Arctic, whether it's government, whether it's JTFN activities, the indigenous peoples that are there and local communities just being present, that by themselves exercises their enduring sovereignty over the Arctic land and waterways. You asked the question, are we ready, Mr. Chair? I would point out, and this a little bit joins to the question from the member, the previous line of questioning, the Department of National Defense issued a new defense policy in 2024, Our North Strong and Free, which is entirely about, a large proportion of that is about, getting the capabilities right to be able to defend the Arctic. It's about getting the sensors, getting the domain awareness, and then getting the capabilities to do so in due course. And just again, on climate change, our North Strong and Free, frankly, is a strategy about the Arctic, and there's an element in there about climate change and adaptability in terms of the capabilities that the Canadian forces will need.
Thank you. Seems like you were prepared for my question. Thanks for answering. The question to General Riviere, Brigadier General, what are the unique challenges in protecting sovereignty, and do you believe that the government is giving you what you need to be able to protect sovereignty, and if not, what you think you need in order to be able to do that?
Mr. Chair, the first challenge in anything Arctic, and I would say in anything defense, is to be aware of what's happening. So it's a question of sensing your environment so that then you can make sense. So the first challenge is that the Arctic is 40% of Canada's landmass. This is immense. Yet you have 130,000 Canadians in 72 communities. And for the forces, especially our size of forces, you can't be everywhere at once. So the challenge is to be able to sense the environment by being there. And what we're doing now by expanding Operation Nanook as a near year-round, as a near persistent activity in focused areas is working on that gap of being able to be present in an immense territory. But this is based on information. So,
being on the front line, what are the main issues that facing the military bases and troops out there? And do you have enough personnel to meet the needs? Do you have enough equipment to meet the needs? Especially if we got surprised by a challenge. How ready are we?
Brief response, please.
Mr. Chair, we are addressing some of these gaps in staffing by undertaking a JTFN staffing and structural review. We are assessing our requirements to match the operational and defense needs of 2028. That's our very short-term horizon. So there is work underway to improve our not only structure, but in the mindset of growth, having the right ranks and trades and numbers to face the challenges of tomorrow.
Thank you.
And there are challenges.
Thank you very much. We will now go to MP Anita van der Belt. You have 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, and thank you very much to our witnesses. I would note that about 6 years ago, this committee did a study on the Arctic. I was part of that study, and there were a number of recommendations at that time regarding security, infrastructure, local ownership and engagement, multilateralism. I wonder if you could give us just a very brief summary of, first of all, what's changed in the last 6 years, but also the progress that has been made on those recommendations.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Perhaps I'll point to I'll start with what's changed. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, accelerated climate change, increased interest of non-Arctic states in the Arctic seeking to advance their own interests, those are some of the drivers that led to us recalibrating our approach through the Arctic foreign policy. In terms of what we've achieved, we've appointed an Arctic ambassador with an office in Canada's north, in Iqaluit. That is literally and figuratively groundbreaking for Global Affairs Canada. We're making good progress on opening consulates in Nuuk and Anchorage. We've initiated the dialogue amongst what we term A7, Arctic 7 foreign ministers to mirror the discussions, dialogue that happens on the defense side. We have provided additional funding for our Global Arctic Leadership Initiative to advance our engagement internationally. We've created a new position in one of our Nordic embassies to help expand our reach. And I would say most importantly, with Global Affairs has changed the way it engages with Indigenous peoples. We've expanded what we call the Arctic Cooperation Advisory Committee. We co-developed the Arctic foreign policy with Indigenous territorial provincial partners, so Indigenous partners. So I think we've come a long, long way. I know that doesn't address your specific ask about on the last study, but I think it speaks to the progress.
A very impressive list indeed. Thank you. One of the things that we heard quite a bit was about the extended continental shelf, and in terms of Canadian sovereignty, the need at that time, the imperative to really be mapping that continental shelf. I know that quite a bit has been done on that. I understand that may be completed by 2026. I wonder if you could tell me how that will reinforce Canada's sovereignty, but also create perhaps increased need for enforcement of those waters.
So one of the priorities under the Arctic and Northern Policy Framework was to better define our Arctic boundaries, and that work is progressing, as you said, and awareness of your environment, as the General has said, is a starting point. In terms of the needs to enforce our jurisdiction, the starting point is, I would say, awareness of what is under your jurisdiction. So progress is continuing. The adjudication of disputes in the Arctic is one that Canada is committed to doing through rule of law approach. Tartupaluk, Hans Island, it's no coincidence that we negotiated that and created our second land border. It's through rule of law, not through force, that we define our borders. So perhaps I'll leave it at that for now, Mr. Chair.
I wonder if the General might have something to add on the enforcement.
A brief response, please.
Yeah. So, Mr. President, at this point, I don't have a response on that.
Okay. Do I have?
Go to the third round of questions, beginning with MP Michael Chong. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you. So, I've got a question on the Arctic archipelago waters. Canada's long claimed these waters as internal waters of Canada and not international waters. Many maritime states, if not most maritime states, including the United States, see these as international waters. Can you tell me which states, maritime states, see our claim as internal waters as the case?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I do not have a list at hand of which states have
recognized our internal waters.
Recognized.
Okay. If you could come back to the committee with that, to the chair, that would be appreciated. As you know, the United States doesn't recognize these waters as internal waters to Canada. In 1985, a U.S. Coast Guard vessel, the Polar Sea, transited these internal waters. I don't know if you did you read the piece by Franklin Griffiths in the Globe and Mail? So he's an esteemed professor emeritus at the University of Toronto who wrote a long-form piece in the Globe and Mail 4 days ago. He speculates that the United States may send a Navy vessel through those straits imminently. What would Canada's response to that be?
Maybe I'll kick off. So, Mr. Chair, perhaps I'll start the answer. Our view is that the dispute over the Northwest Passage is well managed, including through our 1988 Arctic Cooperation Agreement. And perhaps I will turn to Eric or the General for the other.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Yes, you're correct in saying that in the past the U.S. has done so, and the possibility of it doing again in the future is not something that could be excluded. We know that this spring the President issued an executive order on shipbuilding, but also includes a tasking to the Department of Defense to secure Arctic waters without clarifying what those waters are. In terms of a Canadian response to a U.S. sailing that is unauthorized, if I could put it that way, I'd rather not say what the position is, what the response would be at this time.
What assets do we have in the north to prevent that from happening?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Maybe I could reference something earlier. My understanding is during the early days of the pandemic, there was a Canadian ban on ships transiting through the Arctic archipelago waters, but apparently I heard that a boat did transit through those waters. Is that correct?
I'm not aware of the details of that, Mr. Chair. I can say that Canada does require ships that are transiting through over 300 tons or conducting maritime scientific research to apply for permits to do so, and we've done those permits in the past.
Okay. But what assets do we have to prevent that from happening? Do we have any assets up there? Any naval assets, diplomatic assets? What would we do other than indicate our opposition to an unauthorized transit?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I'll leave it to the General maybe to speak about sort of assets that are there. I mean, certainly we have greater domain awareness, including through space, so we would be able to see or track potential surface vessels coming in. We also know very much the ice flow situations, so I think there would be some early warning, perhaps, for a surface vessel. There is always the possibility of sending aircraft to overfly, to communicate with ships, whatever nationality that are transiting, so our presence could be felt.
Okay. I mean, it seems to me that, based on the information you'll provide to the committee, if our claim to these waters as internal to Canada is not widely recognized by other maritime states and vessels such as U.S. warships start transiting through that passage and we are unable to prevent that from happening, it seems like that weakens our claim.
Brief response, please, if at all.
Briefly, I'd also highlight that we do have Arctic and offshore patrol vessels, which is a capability that the United States does not have, and icebreakers. We are partnering with the U.S. through the Ice Pact on building icebreakers. It's a capability that the U.S. Does not have compared to Canada, and I would say the premise of the question does not negate our legal standing vis-a-vis the Northwest Passage.
Thank you. We will next go to MP Rob Oliphant. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, just following a little bit more up on the continental shelf issue that Mr. Chong has raised, as well as Ms. Vandenbeld. The areas under consideration are not limited to one side. We have issues on the east side and on the west side. Can you just say, are there different processes that we will be undertaking to map that, to negotiate it, to what is the international law that we are going to be using to assert the internal water nature of that, both in the west and perhaps the west, the east, because we still haven't finished the Hunts Island issue with respect to the continental shelf. We've done the island itself, but there is still a negotiating to be done there, as well as in the Beaufort.
Mr. Chair, appreciate the question. In terms of the Hans Island Accord with Denmark, I'd like to clarify that, in fact, the agreement is very much in place and has, in fact, established a boundary line on the continental shelf beyond 200 nautical miles in the Labrador Sea, and that boundary is the longest continuous maritime boundary in the world. So where we are now is working with Inuit and Indigenous partners and the Kingdom of Denmark on implementing the agreement. So to take into account issues like Indigenous mobility. So I just wanted to clarify the situation on that. In terms of Northwest Passage, our position is that it is Canada's by dint of historical title. The waters of the Northwest Passage are joined Canada together. They don't divide Canada, and Indigenous peoples have used these waters and territories since time immemorial, and that's part of our sovereignty as well, shared sovereignty. Thank you.
If I can also thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Thanks to Mr. Sinclair for explaining that. I would also point out to the Beaufort Sea, which is an area of dispute that we have with the U.S. That one is also well managed. Canada and the U.S. have collaborated extensively in the preparation of our respective extended continental shelf submissions. In September 2024, we announced the creation of a joint Canada-U.S. task force to undertake negotiations on the maritime boundary in the Beaufort Sea. There was a first negotiating meeting held in November 2024. Changes in the U.S. administration, however, has paused all negotiations, and it's not just Beaufort Sea related, but it's all international negotiations pending a review of policies and positions. So, historically we've managed that relationship well, and we're kind of waiting for next steps.
It seems we've managed it by accepting realities and acting as though we have it without having a declaration from the other partners. Am I right on that? That we assume sovereignty, we assume the borders, but have others assume the borders as well?
Perhaps I can start and then leave it to others. In the case of the Hans Island, there is a declaration. That was a negotiated settlement. In the case of the Arctic archipelago, some states have indicated that they oppose our statement, but a number of states have not positioned themselves, and perhaps it's best we not ask them at the moment. Thanks.
Could I just shift a little bit from the defense and sovereignty issues to culture, education, and the interest that Canada has in circumpolar conversations, in Arctic conversations about shared culture of the Inuit people, the Greenlandic people, and others, as well as non-Indigenous peoples of the North. I mean, we still have many non-Indigenous peoples, Canadians, who live in the North. What is our, do we have a policy on culture? Do we have a policy on education? I know that science is a big issue at the Arctic Council and research, but what about the softer sides of engagement in that?
Very short response, please.
Thank you. So an important part of our engagement with Indigenous peoples. We, at the Arctic Council, it's a priority for Canada to promote Indigenous knowledge. Efforts are ongoing with, amongst others, the National Gallery, for instance, to promote circumpolar Indigenous culture. And we just had a delegation in town of curators, and there were some Sami representatives as part of that visit from...
Thank you. Thank you very much. We will go next to MP Patrick Bonin. You have 2.5 minutes.
I'd like to come back to this. If I understand correctly, Canada has a position with respect to exporting gas and oil in the north. But given the Northwest Passage and the changes, will there be an effect on that? What if the oil tankers want to go through the Northwest Passage with consequences? Thank you, Chair. As I said earlier, for ships that are doing scientific research and they want to go through the straits, they have to obtain approval. But in terms of transporters from elsewhere, I don't want to make a mistake here, but I think that I want to be sure with respect to tankers going through the Northwest Passage or other routes that might be open for a few weeks at different times of the season. I have to say it would be certainly a difficult passage, and there's a lot of environmental risk attached to it as well. Well, could you just perhaps tell us whether or not any passages have been affected by these ships? Let me come back, though, to investment that has been made for the various projects. Those projects that have been put forward, do they really meet the needs of the local communities? Has effort been put into that? Well, you're talking about D&D projects, investment projects I'm referring to. Chair? From what I have seen over the past year, particularly with respect to the growth and the announcement of these investments that are infrastructure critical, there has been a response from various organizations from within D&D that are responsible for delivering these projects. Well, I can say that NORAD also has put forward some projects with respect to the infrastructure platform. And in English, Northern Operational Support Hub program has been set in place, and there is a great deal of local implication. And there is the NORAD basing as well, which involves a lot of consultation, because we want to be sure that we are doing so with consultation.
P. Michael Chong, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I just want to continue discussing our sovereignty in the North. I want to understand what the Government of Canada's position is on the foundation of our sovereignty in the North. Is it the 1670 Hudson's Bay Charter and Rupert's Land, and then subsequently the transfer of that land to the Government of Canada in 1870, or is it something else? Some argue that, the Hudson's Bay Charter only includes the lands that drain into Hudson's Bay and therefore excludes a significant part of the Arctic archipelago, and that a stronger claim to our sovereignty is found when the Inuit affirmed Canada's claim to the lands of the Arctic in the 1993 Nunavut Land Claims Agreement. So what is the Government of Canada's view?
Mr. Chair, I'm not in a position to comment or reply in terms in the legal basis under 1670 Hudson's Bay Agreement. I'm not in a position to.
Could you perhaps come back to the committee with that? Because I think it's pretty important if we're trying to, understand what the basis in law is, both internal law and international law, is for our claim to the internal waters of the Arctic archipelago. I think it has to start with our sovereignty over the lands in the Arctic archipelago. So that would be useful information for the chair to have. So if you could pass it on to the
happy
chair,
to come back on that.
that would be helpful. I want to again focus on these internal waters because, we see what the U.S. Navy is doing in, south of us, off the coasts of, south of Florida and in the Caribbean. We know that they have interests in the Arctic. We know previously they've transited through our waters in 1985. There are reports that former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo argued for a freedom of navigation operation through Canadian internal waters in 2019. I'm wondering, what has the Government of Canada gamed out a scenario where a U.S. warship transits through our internal waters in the coming months?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I can say that, yes, we have gamed it out, but I'm not in a position to provide the response here. I would, however, also point out that, beyond the transit that you mentioned in 1985, a U.S. warship did transit in 2023, but did so basically asking for permission with Royal Canadian naval personnel on board.
Yeah. I'm not talking about transits with permission. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about transits without permission, that under the assumption that these are international waters. That's really, I think, the concern that I and others have.
I can say we've gamed it out, and yeah.
Okay, but you can't tell us what the scenarios would be, what the response would be from the government.
Best to leave a chance for the government of the day to respond.
Okay. Has Canada thought about working with other states on our claims that these waters are internal waters to Canada? States like Panama, Egypt, states surrounding the Malacca Straits in Asia. Are we working with those states on getting their support for our claim?
Mr. Chair, those efforts are led by the Legal Bureau within Global Affairs Canada, and I don't have that information. Happy to come back.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Short question, please, and a short response.
I'm fine. Okay, I'll get the next round. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We will next go to MP Mona Fortier.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I thank you for your service as well, because I know you're working very hard on Canada's Arctic strategy. We are dealing with the foreign policy in the Arctic because there is a need to guarantee our sovereignty in that area. In this context, we are looking at where we should put our best efforts, where should we be doing more. This is an open question. If you were part of the committee that were helping to do this study, If you had to just concentrate on 3 areas or 3 concrete, tangible acts that could help our work, what would you choose? What 3 areas would you choose, given your expertise?
The question, certainly my recommendation would be, as you're doing, to engage with those with Arctic and Northern partners and to hear their perspectives first and foremost, as well getting perspectives from others such as Greenland, I think would be of use to the committee. Perhaps I can turn to my colleagues for other recommendations following the effects of climate change in particular as well, and the impacts on ecosystems and livelihoods, and if I could term it the human security of Arctic residents and Northerners.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'ai vraiment pas grand-chose à ajouter.
Thank you, Chair. I don't really have much to add to what was already said, but my recommendation would be to speak with our Arctic allies as well, and as well as all the other Arctic-facing countries. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Well, in my area, north, in the far north, the challenge that we face is one of mobility above all. All investments that are made to deploy our forces more easily is something to be considered. It's an immense area. And logistics, maintenance of the military, all of that would be at the top of my list. Anything that deals with climate, the ability to adapt to the climate, for example, airstrips and so on, that would help the logistics and enhance our mobility. Yes, but with respect to geopolitics, lots is happening right now. You know, it's very, very hot right now, given what's happening in Ukraine and elsewhere, action that occurs elsewhere. We want to be able to work with our allies to continue to preserve our sovereignty in the Arctic. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. In terms of tangible efforts, tangible measures, we see that we are working with our allies in Europe to defend territory, and this is also an obligation in Latvia. But what we are doing specifically in Canada is to coordinate better, to dialogue better with our allies, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and so on. They are our Arctic allies, and we want to have a forum for discussion amongst foreign ministers dealing with security. This is something that is mirrored in DND because the Minister of Defense acts in a similar fashion. We have senior officers involved, but also information. So we are interconnected in every way. I would add that Minister Joly has hosted her counterparts at Iqaluit with Premier Akiagak and has demonstrated that to our allies what is the Canadian Arctic reality that can be verified in the far north.
The fourth round of questioning, beginning with MP Michael Chong. No? You'll take it? Okay, so we'll go to MP Cramp-Newman.
Thank you. We've covered a lot today, so I'm going to change the direction a little bit. Despite broader tensions that we're currently having with Canada-U.S. relations, are you able to give us a quick rundown regarding joint Canadian-U.S. partnerships in the North? Anything from defense issues, resource development, transportation issues, joint agreements?
In Arctic terms, there's the Ice Pact, which is first and foremost front of mind. And I would say Ice Pact is not just about building ships and putting ships in icebreakers in the water. It's what's behind the ships as well. The knowledge, the skills, the capacity, the capabilities that stand behind all of that speaks to the closeness of the relationship with Canada and U.S. So I see Eric has his finger on the mic, so I'll turn to Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, again, we see, despite the challenging relationship at the moment, on the defense and security side of the equation, the relationship is still very strong and is activated every day through NORAD, for example, and the Binational Command. That cooperation remains, I would say, unscathed from whatever we're hearing out of the White House. And we can also point out to the fact that the Defense Procurement Production Sharing Agreement, the DPSA that we have with the United States, is still in full force, which allows Canadian firms to bid as equal to U.S. entities for Department of Defense contracts.
And I was remiss in not highlighting that when I was senior Arctic official before the appointment of Ambassador Mearns, my U.S. colleague and I spoke frequently about the Arctic Council and how our interests align. I'd also note that our chairship is coming up in a little less than 4 years' time, and the U.S. follows us. So we certainly had discussions about how we could identify themes that could run through the Canadian chairship into the U.S. to bring a North American focus to the Arctic Council after 12 years of European chairship.
Good. Next, are you aware if the Arctic sovereignty has come up in any discussions with the U.S. in context of the ongoing trade talks?
I'm not in a position to comment on that, Mr. Chair.
Next question. On the Beaufort Sea boundary, what is Canada's negotiating mandate with the United States, and what are the milestones for working toward a framework agreement?
Our negotiating mandate, I can't speak to the specifics of it. We had the first technical meeting last November, I believe, and the Inuvialuit Regional Cooperation Corporation was part of the delegation for that. The mandate was informed by consultations with Indigenous and territorial partners.
Okay, thank you. Lastly, Canada has publicly stated that due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there will be no business as usual in Arctic diplomacy with Russia. So if I could have you elaborate or speak a little bit to the fact that Russia is expected to continue low-level probes such as submarine, under-ice transits, electronic interference, all ultimately calibrated to test Canada's surveillance without escalation. If you could speak to that, I would appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. As mentioned, it's not business as usual with Russia, given its illegal invasion of Ukraine. Historically, we've had relatively good cooperation with the Russians in the Arctic. As I mentioned at the beginning, they continue to be bolstering their defensive capabilities and their military capabilities in the Arctic, given with the purpose really to reinforce the northern sea route, so the route that goes along its northern territory in purpose. Russia is Russia, and it continues to probe, as we've seen in Europe, and it does so everywhere else. Thanks.
And just circling back, one last question with regards to the U.S. Does the Government of Canada continue to assess the risk of military attack in North America, Arctic, as low? And do you believe that the United States share in that assessment?
Very brief response, please.
could say from a Canada-U.S. perspective and NORAD perspective, the military command is always watching out for any potential invasion or attack.
Thank you very much. We will go next to MP Bill Blair. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I also want to pivot because one of the first things you said, Mr. Sinclair, is that the first pillar of our Arctic strategy is to assert our sovereignty. And I think there's a tendency among many of us to think in terms of sovereignty of fighter planes and submarines and military capabilities and our ability to defend the Arctic. But when we travel to the north, what they talk about is infrastructure. They talk about sovereignty is infrastructure. It's investment. And although the generals kindly shared with us some of the investments in multi-use infrastructure at our northern operational support hubs and improved domain awareness through things like the Arctic over-the-horizon radar, I think there also needs to be important discussion on the investment in infrastructure in the north, and that includes things like deep water ports. The Russians have 17 of them. We're still working on ours. A rail and road network, and we've heard there's been discussion about that most recently. Our critical mineral strategy, which would be facilitated by such an investment, but it also includes investment in things like communications networks, power generation, water treatment plants, and as you've already mentioned, ice-breaking capability. So you also mentioned, Mr. Sinclair, the importance of accessing international markets and to attract foreign international investment. I think there is opportunity in that, but perhaps you could share with us how we're going to pursue that international investment and as well what precautions we might take to make sure that we are not in any way compromising our sovereignty as we attract other people's money.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Our Trade Commissioner Service is very well positioned to assist Canada in its efforts to diversify our trade and economic relations. There's a big role for us to play in attracting the investment that could underpin major projects that will make a very real difference in Canada's Arctic, whether it's redevelopment of the Port of Churchill, or Grays Bay, Port and Road, and so forth. There's a big role for us to play. And there's interest, and potential there. As the Prime Minister has noted, Canada has much of what the world wants and needs, critical minerals in particular, and how we can help our Arctic territorial northern governments, and I include Indigenous governments in that, sustainably develop those resources. Global Affairs Canada has a real role to play in highlighting the potential and the opportunities there. So whether it's Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund or elsewhere, lots of potential, all of which would be run through the Investment Canada Act as well to ensure that we protect our interests.
Thank you, sir. I'd also make an observation. With the ascension of Finland and Sweden into NATO, I think it created a real opportunity. Just my own observation is that it opened up a line of discussion at NATO and among our closest allies about the importance of Arctic security and the defense of the Arctic. We know that both the Russians have a significant capability, over 50 ice-breaking facilities, 17 deep water ports, as I've mentioned, and they have a strong interest in the Arctic. And we're seeing China also acting quite adversarially in the Arctic, considering themselves a near-Arctic nation. I think that's the terminology they use. I believe the ascension of Finland and Sweden, as well as Norway, Denmark, ourselves, the Americans, has created a real opportunity even to bring in additional partners like Iceland and the Faroe Islands and Greenland for broader discussions. You've already alluded to some of those discussions taking place, but perhaps you could expand on sort of how Finland and Sweden, and I think General Rivera would also share with us that in Nanook, we've got a great deal to learn from our friends, particularly in Finland, who've been operating quite effectively in their Arctic for some considerable period of time. So the opportunities that change has allowed.
Short response.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Briefly, our Nordic partners in particular, who are most proximate to Russia and have the history of the Winter War, etc., they understand the threat. And I would just add that I think there's a lot that we could learn from our Nordic partners as how do they engage their citizenry on the breadth and depth of that threat. It's not just a war against Ukraine. There's a broader threat there. I'd also add that the Rangers program, there's significant interest amongst our Nordic partners in the Rangers program. We recently brought some Sami representatives over to Canada to learn about the Rangers model and how that Indigenous knowledge can be used to greater effect.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Monsieur Bonin, vous avez 2 minutes.
Mr. Bonin, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to come back to the question put by my honourable colleague with respect to the recommendations that could be made by our committee with respect to this very, very dynamic security situation we are experiencing now. Can you come back to the concerns and the consequences of the recommendations the committee might be making in this environment? Thank you, Chair. I will start, and I could invite my colleagues perhaps to express their opinions. Clearly, when you look at climate change, you see, and this is a major issue in a sense, the ice is melting, but it's not yet open. The transit isn't open. It is quite limited. There is more difficulty in terms of navigation because there are large chunks of the ice flow that remain, that have to be navigated. And then you have climate change, navigation in the north. That might be a propitious area to look at timelines in terms of the horizon. And in English, the permafrost and the impact that its melting can have on infrastructure. These are 2 considerations that come into my mind first and foremost. My colleagues may have others.
Merci pour la question. Désolé.
Thank you. I'm so sorry, but I will answer in English.
J'ajouterai que
I could add, though, that my recommendation would be this. Base your recommendations, insofar as possible, on imperatives. There's a narrative that the Arctic is open, and other countries like China are going to be inserting themselves into the Arctic. But that's not the immediate case. So you have to be very careful about this. You don't want to demonstrate panic.
Thank you.
Yes, but you're talking about 2030. Am I not for the ice flow to be open completely, to be opened 2030?
I'll answer in English just to make sure I get it right. I apologize. The waterways are opening. It doesn't. Ice is melting. That doesn't mean it's safer. It's also more unpredictable. And when you look at the draft of the ships that would look to transit through that area, they need deep water, and those channels are the most fraught.
Thank you very much. We'll go next to MP Ziad Abou Taif. You have 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair. We know that vessels, icebreakers pass through, especially from non-Arctic states. How many do we receive permissions for access? And if we do, how many in a matter of a year, for example?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have the numbers. I'm also not aware of a whole lot of ice-breaking states from non-Arctic states transiting through. Transport Canada would be the government entity that monitors that.
Will General Riviere have any comment on the same question?
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I don't have a comment at this point. This is not, I don't have that data, unfortunately.
Sinclair, on the Arctic policy, we heard before the policy came out the term of pragmatic diplomacy. Is pragmatic diplomacy part of the new policy?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Yes, it is part of the policy. It's the second pillar, and it's, I would say, based on an onion skin approach of working most closely with our closest allies, the U.S. and the Nordics, and then working outward from that. So the EU, the UK, Japan, and the Republic of Korea to join the North Pacific to the Arctic.
So Russia is not on the same list?
Most definitely not, and we have some very direct language in the Arctic foreign policy that, as we've noted, no return to business as usual, and it's for Russia to create the conditions for a return to business as we used to know it, and we're not bashful about that in any way, shape, or form.
Maybe it will be beneficial for the sake of this study to tell the audiences what's the percentage of share we have as Canada in the Arctic, and what the shares of others such as Russia, United States, Denmark as the main Arctic partners or states.
So starting with Russia, Russia has about 50% of the Arctic, and I would add there that one of the impacts of no business as usual with Russia and the closing down of Russian society is an increased demand for access to the Canadian Arctic by researchers, and that produces an impact on our Arctic and Northern and Indigenous partners in terms of the increased interest there. We've got a 20-some-odd% of the Arctic. I couldn't give you figures about the U.S. and the Nordics.
If, in light of what's going on with Russia in Ukraine and the overall policies and politics, Russia and China are cooperating a lot. They're becoming very strong allies. More than ever. If they decide to do any military action or any move in the north, are we ready with our allies to basically defend that, and at which level can that defense go in order to be able to not to lose any sight of sovereignty in the area?
I think my colleague Eric is best placed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I say Russia and China working together in the north, that's a very big space. I could break it down in the North American space. We've seen, as mentioned before, Russian and Chinese joint maritime patrols of Coast Guard and naval ships, joint long-range bomber flights, and those instances were met by NORAD aircraft. So again, there is awareness, there is tracking, and those were turned around. If we are talking about, Russian, Chinese, maybe less, conflict against NATO. First off, I don't see China being directly involved in a conflict against NATO, but certainly potentially supporting Russia, as we've seen it in Ukraine. And there, the alliance is prepared. It has the plans in place and the authorities and the command structure to respond. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We will go next to MP Anita Van Delveld. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And thank you for all of the testimony you've already given. I think very useful for our report. When I asked you about the extended continental shelf, you said something along the lines that we will be asserting our sovereignty primarily through diplomacy and the international rules-based order. I wonder if you could elaborate on that, and also the mention that you made of the 72 communities, 130,000 people who are living in the Arctic, who identify as Canadian, go to Canadian schools, receive Canadian social insurance numbers and healthcare, and the historic presence of those people throughout millennia. If you could talk a little bit about how those things reinforce our sovereignty in that area.
Thank you. So in terms of the extended continental shelf, Mr. Chair, we discussed mapping, knowing what we're talking about. There's the UN Commission. We will work through that process, which is a very long-term endeavor. But again, it goes to our Canadian approach of rule of law, and it's important that we walk the talk in that regard. And I think there's important symbolic value in how we approached Tartupalak and Hans Island, and how we're approaching Beaufort Sea and negotiations. We negotiate, we don't active force. In terms of Indigenous peoples, very much shared sovereignty in the Arctic. Premier Akiagak, I've heard him speak extremely eloquently about our very, very regrettable history of using Inuit as human flagpoles. But he turns it around and says, first Canadians, Canadians first. And that's the approach that informs our approach in terms of sovereignty and historic title. It's shared sovereignty. Thank you.
And you mentioned also about Russia that foremost, it is not business as usual. And you just briefly mentioned some implications of that in terms of science. If you could maybe elaborate on other implications and how things are different now because of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
So first and foremost, in terms of the impact of closing down of Russian space and limited engagement, we're missing huge chunks of data, 50% of the Arctic, and we're missing that data. So that is a concern. As well, there's increased pressure on Canadian communities that see researchers coming to them to try to undertake research and not necessarily always sensitive to capacities and how to meaningfully engage and consult with Indigenous partners in terms of, when a project or a study is a twinkle in their eye, that's when they should be engaging to get local perspectives and seeing if they're going about this the right way. So there's a bit of that impact as well.
Do you have any recommendations about how we can ensure that that does happen?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. That's a very good question. I would say be part of the advocacy in terms of your recommendations and put forward best practices about how to meaningfully engage with Indigenous partners in the Arctic, whether it's on research, whether it's on infrastructure, whether it's on how to best utilize Indigenous knowledge and get ground truth. That would be my recommendation.
And to be clear, you're talking about nationals of other countries on research vessels that are coming in and doing this with permission?
No, I'm talking about research institutes, universities coming to Canada and looking to do research, and we have an extensive ecosystem. Polar Knowledge Canada are great partners as well, but there needs to be better awareness amongst some, not all, some foreign researchers.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Colleagues, we're about to go into our 5th round of questioning, and we have just less than 15 minutes. So if it's the will of the committee, I'd like to suggest that we do a quick round of 3 minutes each, and that way everybody gets a chance to speak. So we'll start with MP Abul Taif. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. The investment in building communities in the north, we only have 130,000 people in 72 communities, if I heard that correctly earlier. Do we believe that just with these communities will be enough for us to at least counter what Russia is doing on the other side, being for years building on those communities and infrastructure? If that by point of comparison, would be important to hear the department of Mr. Sinclair about that comparison and what should we do more or better in order to see the future, because I mean we're running into a racing game here. Before we know that we're not ready, or we're not ready enough to do that.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I'll start off perhaps by saying how we build in the north is probably quite different than how Russia builds. We've learned from our mistakes, I hope, in the past. And as you've heard me say, there's an emphasis and a premium put on engaging with local communities as to how best to develop dual-use infrastructure. That wasn't there before for us. I do not think Russia takes the same approach to how it develops its Arctic and North. And its respect for indigenous peoples is, I would say, at best token. Perhaps I'll leave it at that in terms of civilian infrastructure, dual-use infrastructure. I'm not sure if my colleagues have anything to add.
General Riviere, do you agree to that? And what will be your approach?
I go back, Mr. Chair. Okay. I go back to the essential need to focus on sustainment, mobility, logistics. The effort should be in allowing that type of development.
On the wish list, if I have to ask you a question, what would you like to see happening as the military guy there? What would you like to see? What's your wish list?
20 seconds for response.
I would like for the Northern Operational Support Hub program to implement.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abul Taif. We will next go to MP Mona Fortier.
Merci. Alors, peut-être sur un
Thank you. We see that there are many projects underway for investment. Prime Minister Carney has invested $6 billion in Over the Horizon project in partnership with Australia. But, you know, time is the problem. We want to be able to move as quickly as possible. How can we accelerate our projects at this time? Thank you for your question. In fact, yes. Indeed, with the new defense policy, the modernization of NORAD, and the 2017 program with engagement, we see that there has been strong growth in the military that is benefiting the North. The over-the-horizon radar, the support hubs that the General spoke about, and also offshore Arctic patrols, the acquisition of drones, maritime patrol ships, and the submarines. It's a lot of investment. Defense, DND, PSPC, and others are involved in the project. the Defense Investment Agency, whose main goal it is to accelerate the acquisition of all of this material, is something that we have, as recently as last week, seen. We want to accelerate, and we want to increase from this year by 5% to 2030. Can you add anything else, sir? I would certainly promote innovation, experimental undertakings in the north, like Nanook, but the acquisition of platforms. We have to be able to procure all of this. Why would you not promote certain platforms that would be already in place, and that would be a way of accelerating the whole process? Secondly, we could call upon Indigenous knowledge, something that we can be used to great effect. Thank you.
Next, go to MP Mario Simard. Vous avez 3 minutes.
You have 3 minutes, Mr. Simard. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. I have been listening very closely to what you have been saying, particularly with respect to NATO sites moving up to 5%, and the use of infrastructure and critical minerals that may well be needed to reach the 5% level. So we do know that there is a wealth of critical minerals in the north, and the NATO countries are very dependent on that. I'd like to know if anything has been thought about. Have you given any thought to supporting the 5%, each in your own way? The DND first, but also with respect to the infrastructures that are linked to critical minerals that will allow us to do so. Thank you for your question. The Allies all agreed this summer to work towards the 5% GDP level for defense, and 3.5% represents investment in core defense undertakings. 1.5% is allotted to areas where states can improve their resiliency and become more secure, resilience vis-a-vis adversaries, but also do something to help their economies become stronger. You are right. There has been thought given to national investments, large projects, nationwide, that can represent the 1.5% of the 5%. And very quickly, this will, for certain NATO countries, to have a threshold price on critical minerals. We've heard about that. That would take some sort of form of predictability, would it not? We don't want dumping. And we don't want the projects to become less competitive. But I heard talk about this type of threshold that would be established for critical minerals. At NATO per se, I'm not. I do know that there were decisions made by certain countries, and our colleagues from Natural Resources would probably better placed to answer your question. Thank you.
Good. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Gentlemen, year-round armed forces presence depends on fuel, maintenance, medical, munitions, and mobility, and food security. What is the sustainment model, and where are the gaps today? And are you able to detail the plan to close these gaps?
As I mentioned earlier, mobility is key. We have the Northern Operational Support Hub that are coming online. That's going to add to the capacity. I'd say the principal gap is our ability to be, we can't be everywhere at once. It's impossible. So we have to leverage on military mobility for sustainment. Again, I truly believe, as myself a logistician, that the best thing we can do to invest, and we're doing it, is the Northern Operational Support Hub. This will allow us to pre-position equipment, material, vehicles, and actually it provides flexibility overall. So that would be my first round of answer, Mr. President.
Thank you very much for that. Do the armed forces contribute to the food supply for northern communities?
No, and we may, Mr. President, we make sure that any time we deploy that we bring our own sustainment and facilities, and we will never impose any pressure on communities. That's a basic. We will never apply pressure on Canadians and the communities in the north.
So kind of along that lines, what benefits or advantages then would the permanent Arctic base give the armed forces? And again, would it contribute to any of those living in the north?
Mr. President, I believe that as we make these investments, there's going to be a local workforce that will be part of the investment. So that's a major benefit there. I think that it comes with increased supply chain activity as well. So it's not only good for the critical infrastructure development of the forces, but also for business. These would be my thoughts.
And just a quick final question. Is there any equipment that you can identify that is in serious need of upgrade or repair right now that's vital?
Very quick response, please.
It's part of the series of platform projects. Again, mobility, including over land, is something that we need, that's being procured and looked at.
Thank you very much. Next, we have MP Anita van der Bel. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. And actually, just following up on that, General Riviere, it's actually more than just being self-sustained in terms of food and supplies, because my understanding is when, for instance, we've expanded runways so that larger jets can actually land on those runways, now local communities will then be able to have larger aircraft that can come in with more food and therefore decreasing the food prices. Is that correct?
This is correct. And sorry, Mr. President, and case in point is the Innovic runway extension project, which benefits all around. Yes, Mr. President.
Well, thank you. Are there other examples where infrastructure investments made by CAF are actually having that sort of dual purpose benefit in the north?
I'm not sure if we've started implementing it, Mr. President, but the air navigation system, Air NAS, is one area that would benefit not only our Air Force, but airplanes and air people writ large, Mr. President.
Thank you. And I know we have a very short time, but I just wanted to go back to what you said, Mr. Sinclair, earlier on about our relationship with Denmark and I would say other Nordic countries. You said that their priorities are oceans, climate, indigenous, things that are also our priorities. I wonder if you could very quickly elaborate on the ways in which we are using multilateralism with those countries to advance on, particularly on climate and oceans.
For sure. So I'll cite one specific example that I think you heard about in last week's testimony, the permanent observership status that has been granted to ICC at the IMO. Again, importing Indigenous knowledge into that form and having them at the table is key. I would say as well, just the general support that Canada has been playing a leading role on in terms of engaging Indigenous peoples in the Arctic Council through the 6 permanent participants there. We were big supporters of the Wildland Fires Initiative that the Norwegian chairship started, but which the Kingdom of Denmark is rolling over and continuing. These are just a couple of the very current examples.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony and for appearing for this study. That concludes this meeting. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn? Yeah.